Hello and welcome to Strat News Global. I'm Ishwarya Parekh, and today we're talking about DeepSeek, the Chinese artificial intelligence portal that brought several US stocks to sink in a day. And I have with me Shubhankita Reddy. She's from Takshashila Institution. She's a research analyst there, and she's probably going to tell us today about more about DeepSeek and what its implications for India are. So, welcome to our show, Shubhankita. We can probably you can run us through what DeepSeek is. More than, I'm sure it's more than just an artificial intelligence portal that has come up and caused security concerns for users across the world. So you can probably take us through that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So, DeepSeek is a Chinese AI lab slash startup, and it is solely owned and funded by a Chinese hedge fund called Highflyer. And the reason this has gotten newsworthy globally, I think, is primarily because no one expected in the US, particularly, that China was so close to the US in the artificial intelligence race. So, prior to the release of the R1 model, which is the latest model that has caused the NVIDIA stock prices to sink and so on, if you had asked anybody in the AI space in the US how far behind they thought China was, they would have at least told you, 6 to 9 months. Now we know that the gap is much, shorter and smaller than that. It's probably, less than 3 months, in fact. So I think just that is the major concern, which is that I think everybody suspected that Chinese AI was globally, technologically supreme. But the fact that this is a signal to the fact that this is actually true, I think, is one of the reasons. And DeepSeek actually has been doing interesting work since its incorporation in 2023. But its parent company, the Highflyer hedge fund, has been around for more than a decade. And honestly, they've been doing interesting cutting edge AI work throughout their operations, right? So, really end to end in terms of data collection, data processing, portfolio construction, their investment strategies, which is all the operations that a hedge fund does, they've pretty much made them AI first, which meant that they had the in-house talent to do something like this. And DeepSeek was incorporated in 2023. And unlike even the Western AI startups that you hear of, and even Chinese AI startups that might be comparative to DeepSeek, right? The likes of Tencent, ByteDance, Moonshot, some of these other companies that also have cutting-edge AI work that's happening internally. I think DeepSeek is peculiar in the sense that it is not focused on commercializing their outputs. Correct? I mean, DeepSeek is almost like an AI research lab. And of course, the commercial interests for DeepSeek tie into the commercial interests of hedge fund, but they don't necessarily need to commercialize their own operations. So what we know is that DeepSeek does not have any PR team, no sales team. They have this almost idyllic research culture for young talent to come over, experiment. That's I think what's surprising to everybody, which is that this open source model, by the way, the models that DeepSeek has put out, be it the V3 one that came up a few months ago, the R1 model, which is a reasoning model that came out late December, all of them are open weight in the sense that you can host them on your own servers, and you can pretty much see the code quite transparently. So while you might not be able to replicate and retrain the model, you can view it, you can modify it, you can distribute it, you can commercialize over it. So very generous open source licenses have been allowed on this model. So I think if you remove the two main components of the story, which is China and open source, the story wouldn't have been as newsworthy as it actually is.
Right. But that being said, what about the data leak concerns that have been going around? And if I'm not wrong, India's cyberspace agency or cybersecurity agency has also, warned users about how it can leak, it can take your data and can be misused. So, what does this mean for India? How is DeepSeek going to work with India? If I'm not wrong, if you ask it about any conflict related to China, DeepSeek has its own, concerns. So how does this work for a space like India?
Yeah. No, so this is actually in line with Chinese policy, right? So if you take a step back, China has been championing the idea of internet sovereignty, which is that just like a nation needs to protect its physical borders, it needs to protect its digital borders, which is why China actually is a champion of dissent on opinion, internet censorship. They're also quite keen on ensuring information power is aligned to national interests, which is, their broader, Xi Jinping thought on information power and cyberspace. So from the get-go, from the early 2000s, China has had what we call the Great Firewall, which is that external Western social media platforms have not been allowed to, operate in China. And China then, went on to develop their own indigenous social media platforms, which then were under the regulatory purview of the Chinese administration. So I think everything that you see in the artificial intelligence space is pretty similar to the the social media and the regulation around that, which is that any public facing generative AI platform comes under the purview of some of these regulations, which is to say that if you're consuming artificial intelligence via a user interface, which can be a chat interface, it can be a social media platform, and you are, looking at videos generated or synthetically modified images from generative AI, then all of this comes under the regulatory purview of the Chinese administration, which is broader information power and broader public opinion, and ensuring that that is in line with the Chinese administration. However, all of these generative AI models almost have a free rein when it comes to model building, backend kind of work, right? So, for example, the same R1 model, the app and the chat interface will not answer politically sensitive questions, or will distort the questions in terms of what it considers to be the truth. But the same model, when hosted in your own servers, for example, Perplexity and Grok and some of these companies have hosted the R1 model, and none of these hesitations and hindrances come out of locally hosted environments. So there is clearly a difference between the public facing interface and the backend model in itself. So the model is not necessarily politically hindered, but the final interface that's public opinion facing is. So I think that is the important distinction to draw, which is that if you're using the chat interface, then yes, it will not answer some of these questions for you. But if you host it on your own servers and then fine tune it to your local context, or even if you don't fine tune it, as long as you own the model in your own environment, some of these hindrances will not occur, which is, probably the reason why Perplexity, for example, has gone ahead and done this. And even the union minister, Ashwini Vaishnav, has said that they would consider hosting DeepSeek on Indian servers, because then some of these concerns are kind of mitigated. The other aspect is, as long as you have the chat interface, the questions you type in into the chat interface and the answers that it kind of throws out are being operated out of servers in China. Which means that they can actually see what are the questions, from which geography, the answers that are given out. So I think that's the data privacy concern. The fact that these servers of the chat interface are located outside of our national borders, I think that is where the concern for the broader data privacy space is. Having said that, since its popularity, DeepSeek has also had a few cybersecurity attacks. Just last month, they had one a large scale malicious attack. So I think just because it's risen so much in popularity the last few months, it's also become vulnerable to some of these attacks. So I think that's another side concern regarding data privacy that DeepSeek faces.
Right. So that actually brings me to my next question. Should India be concerned about the fact that AI is dominated by either the US or China, and what does that mean for India?
Yeah, yeah. I think firstly, DeepSeek actually changed the global AI landscape in some sense, right? So prior to, say, the V3 or even the R1 model coming out, the broader narrative was that we need large training data and we need billions of dollars, and only then can we build a foundational model from scratch. DeepSeek kind of has changed that narrative by saying that actually on the inference side, which is after training, when you ask a question to these interfaces and the answer they give, that is called the inference. They've actually done a lot of optimizations at the inference end, and they've also done a bunch of hardware optimizations, which is they have gone around NVIDIA's CUDA software and they've directly worked with the chip and the hardware layer, and they've made a bunch of optimizations there. And today, the result of all of this means that we don't actually need the kind of money that was previously thought. So this has just made the entire AI foundational model space a lot more accessible in terms of cost for everybody, including India. So India is a beneficiary as far as that is concerned. But I think the broader question about technological sovereignty, which is what you asked about, we don't necessarily have our own Indian model. This is a space that is, contested between US and China, and where does India stand with that regard? I think it's important to demarcate the entire AI supply chain, right? Which is that does having the capacity to build your own model necessarily give you, like an indigenous AI capability? Is that sufficient? Is that enough? Or is it also other applications, right? For example, India is very well known to do a lot of application layer work, which is that you take the R&D and infrastructure provided by somebody else, and then you make it usable to different contexts and different businesses, and the service delivery of that is very valuable. And India traditionally has done quite well in the service delivery aspect of things, right? So that is still a very valuable layer in the AI stack. Apart from that, the middle layer, which is broadly data infrastructure, data privacy, making sense of data to eventually power some of these applications, is also another important layer in the stack. Talent is an important layer in the stack, and India has very, very talented developers globally spread. Also, R&D, algorithms, research in the space. There are a whole bunch of components that go into one particular sector. And I think what we need to understand is one particular area that can deter your adversaries. If you have an excellence in that alone, that's still a valuable lever to have. But having said that, I think there is space now for India to contribute to the broader AI space now that it has become a little more democratized. This does warrant deep introspection as to why something like this did not come out of India in the first place. Because so much of what DeepSeek has done is software and hardware optimizations, which is actually fairly math, right? I mean, it's innovations that are incremental that then kind of add up over time. So this actually could have come out of India, but it didn't. So I think that's the broader question to ask ourselves about our R&D infrastructure space. But as it pertains to AI, I think there's a lot more that this has allowed us to do in terms of the playing space. And we should think about what our levers and strengths in the AI stack are. Is it necessarily in the foundational layer? Is it in the data infrastructure and enablement layer? Is it in the application and the service delivery layer? Is it in holding chips? Is it in building chips ourselves? Is it in good ties with the broader multilateral effort towards AI so that we are not left out when developments are being made? Is it in talent? So I think that's a broader question for us to think about. Where are India's levers in this? How do we ensure that we don't get left behind?
Right. That being said, actually, since you've mentioned, what it is that how India can go around this. I also want to ask because this is something that, if I'm not wrong, the Prime Minister has mentioned at the AI summit that we're also looking to do it in a more sustainable manner. This is something that India is focusing on, on using more sustainable energy to sort of make more AI models, or sort of make technology that also aligns with our sustainability goals. So, do you think that is something that has uh, prevented India from being able to create an AI model of its own so far?
So I think The primary blockage in India's journey to creating its own foundational model uh, was actually, I think, mindset to begin with, and secondly, maybe capital and the lack of an innovation architecture internally. I think climate and sustainability related goals actually come way down, maybe like the seventh or eighth reason for India to not having built its own model, right? So I think initially, like, even if you remember Sam Altman in India, and his statements about how much money it takes to build a foundational model, some of those just meant that we were deterred because we thought the costs were just too high and it's not feasible and it doesn't make sense. So I think that was the first. And the second, I think, is a innovation architecture absence in India, right? Which is that private R&D spending in India is very low. Even government R&D spending is focused on very few sectors and not necessarily AI. AI is just about picked up recently. So I think the blockages were elsewhere, not necessarily in the sustainability and climate change perspective. But I do think that is an important angle to think about. And now that we know the costs for developing some of these, the compute requirements for developing some of these are way less than what was previously thought a couple years ago. I think it should mitigate some of the concerns towards climate change as well.
Right. So, one last question. What do you think? Should users use, should we be using DeepSeek widely, and what is the way around it? How can you use it without it causing threat to your own data or work?
Yeah. So I'll say DeepSeek is actually very good with math and coding related problems, right? Which is the reasoning model that it is. It's much better on math coding problems as compared to, I would say, just Perplexity or ChatGPT when it comes to information retrieval and things like that. So I would say I have personally found DeepSeek to not be very helpful in my area of research, which is not math and coding and reasoning. But having said that, I think we should be concerned, right? I mean, purely from a epistemologic perspective, purely from information and knowledge perspective, I think we should be concerned if the knowledge that we're getting out of an LLM is not in line with our national security concerns. So as far as that is concerned, I think the DeepSeek app that is provided by the hedge fund player, which is the chat interface, I think that actually has some issues definitely, and so we shouldn't use that. Having said that, if India were to locally host the same model in Indian servers and remove some of these encumbrances of political sensitivity, I think the model then becomes as open source and global as anything else, and that then doesn't cause the same kind of concerns.
So, does that sort of make it applicable for work in slightly more sensitive sectors, something like governance or even news for that matter?
Yeah, yeah, I think this is not a model suited for those use cases, right? So I think the best use cases of this model are perhaps math, coding, reasoning at best, not necessarily anything related to news, getting your information, getting what you think to be the truth about current events, etc. I think uh, especially use of this model by armed force personnel or people in the government, I think that's something that should concern us. But having said that, as long as India has our own model, it's not like the other models are necessarily saints, right? I mean, the other models can still see the questions and answers that are being asked of it, and if one were to track it, it's still theoretically possible. So I think to the extent that India can have our own servers to at least host some of these open weight models, or build our own foundational models from scratch, which now we know is all the more possible. I think we should avoid from using models like DeepSeek in the broader balance for information.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for talking to us, Shubhankita. Viewers, that's Shubhankita Reddy from Takshashila Institution. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching Stat News Global.